The automotive industry often teases us with truly incredible cars that could have been, wild concept designs that drive imaginations crazy, but rarely ever make it past the expo floor. Cars such as maybe the Mako Shark Corvette or even the Volkswagen W12 give us a dash of excitement for a potential future legend, but end up being relegated to museums as what they could have been, and being a lesson or a stepping stone for a company as they continue to release cars meant for production convenience. But there was one car that effectively stopped the world in its tracks when it was unveiled at the Detroit Auto Show in 1995. Today, we will be talking about the almost heir to the famed GT40's throne, the quad-turbo, V12-powered Ford GT90. But first, a quick message from this video's sponsor, CarVertical. CarVertical is an online vehicle history platform that allows you to pull back the curtain and truly see what the potential car you might be purchasing is hiding. Let's say, for example, you found a steal of a deal on a 2019 Mustang GT, but you want to make sure everything is on the up and up. Well, in just seconds, you can slip away from the pushy salesman and enter in the VIN number of the car and get a detailed report that shows all the things that you would want to know before buying a car, like its owner history, real mileage calculations, title status, and even in this case, a nasty accident that actually ended up totaling the car. So if you're looking to buy a car soon, then go to the link in the description to save 10% on your first CarVertical vehicle check by using the code RARECARS. And remember, the insignificant price of one CarVertical report could end up saving you thousands when purchasing your next car. Now, we all know the purpose and reason why Ford assigned War Powers to its racing division in the 1960s, to design the GT40, which was to famously end Ferrari's reign at the 24 Hours of Le Mans, and to prove that Ford could compete with the greatest companies in the world. And this legend brought on two more generations of the GT40 itself in the 21st century, but seemingly lost to history was a different successor to the 1960s legend made some 30 years after. The 1990s were considered a low point for automotive design universally, as many companies were using the same sort of dull, cigar-shaped design for all of their cars. A design that was so bland that drivers would even maybe have difficulty finding their own car in a dimly lit parking lot. To help cope with this lack of design, Ford's independent studios were tasked with designing different cars that were supposed to keep the creative ideas flowing through the company. And among those studios were the International and Advanced Studios, along with Ghia in Italy, which were all led at the time in this joint project by the creator of the Escort RS 2000, a man named Tom Scott. Tom Scott was quoted as saying, "At the time, we had all this research telling us that we needed to be different. But what did that mean? There was research everywhere with trends and ideas, but the one thing I knew was that we could not keep doing this oval theme grill anymore, plonked onto these jelly bean cars that looked like a floating cigar." Ouch, right? Scott's idea was to give his designers total design freedom in the hope that something truly exciting would come out of it. Scott initially tasked 6 designers to draw up concept ideas, which led to Jim Hope's initial rendering of what essentially was a GT40 from the future. And the chassis that they would use to base this on was the one from the Jaguar XJ220, which was a Jaguar supercar that was a very slow seller. Ford had recently acquired the Jaguar brand at this point in the late 90s, and Scott had a single Jaguar XJ220, and they had the body chopped off and the chassis lengthened for a larger mid-engine V12 powertrain, compared to the 6-cylinder that would have initially came in the XJ220. As this new concept car's body was taking shape, Ford worked through lots of different names to call this new concept. They started with the hallowed GT40 name. They moved a few years later to the unsuccessful GT70, in which 4 drivable examples were created but never released due to a lack of performance. In the end, they felt it was apt to call it the GT90, which was the name of this new one-off Ford prototype. And when the curtain was pulled back, the result was nothing less than a work of art. The design group combined sweeping lines with sharp features and edges throughout the entire car, including a very triangular design to accentuate the taillights and exhaust throughout the carbon fiber body in a way that was extremely different from everything else on the market at the time. The car's front end reminds you of something from an 80s science fiction movie, with small rectangular headlight slit openings mounted to the fenders that themselves essentially framed a laminated glass dome that would cover the occupants like a fighter jet cockpit. The design also included an active rear spoiler that would raise at high speeds for added stability. The designers of the GT90 also made sure to pay homage to its GT40 ancestor by giving it knockoff wheels and similar doors to an actual GT40, which again was a very nice touch. Powering this innovative design was an extremely interesting engine for Ford. The engine in this car was developed in total secrecy, and it was hidden under the hood of a Lincoln Town Car prototype of all things. The engine itself was a mashup with the 90-degree modular Ford V8, and yet it had cylinder heads that were initially designed for the Aston Martin DB7, also owned by Ford at the time. The engine design eventually resulted in a 48-valved, 6.0-liter V12 that would be mid-mounted in the GT90, which was achieved by combining the Aston Martin head design and the Ford modular V8 block design. And for the best part, Ford decided to not make this engine naturally aspirated. They decided to add not 2, but 4 Garrett turbochargers to make the GT90 a quad turbocharged V12. It is reported that naturally aspirated, this engine would have made around 400 horsepower, but when the boost was added, the GT90 would crank out 720 horsepower and 660 foot-pounds of torque on a self-proclaimed mild tune. With this tune, Ford calibrated, and albeit never tested, that at 6,300 RPM in the highest gear, the GT90 would be able to do flat out just over 235 miles per hour. They also figured the car would have a 0 to 60 of about 3.1 seconds and a blistering quarter-mile time of 10.90 at 140, which would have put it into the category as one of the fastest cars in the world at the time. And Ford even admits as well that turning the boost up on the V12 would have cranked out over 900 horsepower. However, Ford never allowed the engine itself to be cranked up to its full potential in the fear of putting stress on some of the weaker prototype spec parts throughout the car. And when they gave the car to a select few journalists to test it, they only allowed them to use a 400 horsepower tune that did not really spool the turbos for safety purposes. But when it was at full blast, that 720 horsepower was to be fed to the rear wheels using a specially designed 5-speed gearbox created by FF Developments and Ricardo. And while it was never fully driven to its full potential, the GT90 itself was built to perform. Keeping the GT90 connected to the pavement was essentially a Jaguar XJ220 chassis, with 4-wheel disc brakes, double wishbone suspension, and an aluminum monocoque chassis, which had been lengthened for application in the GT90. And the XJ220 handled magnificently, so it's no surprise that the GT90 would have probably performed very similar. The interior of the GT90 is best described as a combination of the 90s sports car style and a race car style, with exposed metal throughout the car that offsets the blue-colored interior, with racing harnesses wrapping the bucket seats in the car. When the car rolled off the design floor, the GT90 cost upwards of $3 million for the lone concept car, and initially it was not well received by Ford's higher-ups or even the Detroit press when it was unveiled in 1995 at the Detroit Auto Show. However, as soon as the general public saw this new design, people started asking Ford's global vice president of design, Jack Telnack, about the GT90. And they asked him, was the GT90 the future of Ford? His response was that the future of Fords would have a new edge, quote unquote. And let me know down below in the comments if you get that reference. The GT90 was shown off as this tire-smoking banshee that could be the future of the American supercar. It was even featured by Jeremy Clarkson on BBC's Top Gear in Period, where that car was being teased as eventually becoming an actual production vehicle. However, after the initial press circuit ran its course, the executives at Ford tragically decided it didn't make logistical or monetary sense for Ford to build a high-tier exotic car to compete with the other exotic brands. Instead, Ford opted to utilize their newly acquired brands of Aston Martin and Jaguar to be the more premium arms of their company to build these types of cars. So the GT90 itself was shelved, in the real world that is. The GT90 proved itself to be such a sensational design that it was actually chosen to be part of multiple top-selling racing video games at the time, like Gran Turismo 2, Need for Speed 2, and the Sega GT series, with hundreds of thousands of young kids across the country seeing this car for the first time in these games and being enamored by it. Since the 1990s, the single GT90 prototype car has been shown at multiple events before it was purchased by a private owner in Oklahoma, and it is now part of the Heyday Motorsports Museum. The GT90 itself was not only cutting edge on the outside, it was also given a one-off engine that would inspire Ford designers and car enthusiasts alike with its radical approach to power, matched by its equally radical styling. And looking at the GT90 objectively, even though it wasn't ever fully produced, I think Ken Miles would have appreciated just what Ford was able to cook up with the GT90. And that makes it truly worthy, in my opinion, of being the descendant to the famed GT40. Thank you all for watching another episode of our Rare Cars documentary series. If you enjoyed this video, we would greatly appreciate it if you could drop a like and also share this video with other enthusiasts. Also, please make sure that you are subscribed to the Rare Cars YouTube channel and smash that notification bell for more documentary style videos just like this on the world's most interesting cars. Until next time, enthusiasts.